Every so often you fall down the YouTube rabbit hole and you watch tons and tons of videos, and the person on the other side of the screen starts to seem like one of your very best friends. And that has happened for a lot of people based on the subscriber count for Barry of Barry Quilts. He decided to take up quilting as a retirement project, and we are all along for the ride as he builds his quilt room and learns to make beautiful quilts, and he's doing a great job so far. So cheers to you, Barry. One of the features on his channel is the Memory Makers Button Club, and he's asking people to send in buttons so that he can fill a button jar on the shelf behind him. And I just think that is a great idea for building community and keeping us all connected in this busy, hectic world that we live in. And rather than send a small button, I decided to make a button quilt block. Barry, this pattern is for you. I've got a free download on my website, and this block will go in the mail just as soon as I finish recording this video. So let me show you how I came up with this button block for Barry.
Okay, one of the best things about having EQ8 is that when I get an idea for a new quilt or a quilt block in this case, I can sketch it out and get all the measurements really, really quickly. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to start with a block because I'm just making that one single button block today. And I set myself up with a grid here for the easy draw system. I've got my standard square width and height. All those settings are fine. So I'm going to start with some lines, and I know that I want those little spots in the button for the stitching to be in the corners. So that's what I'm focused on here with this grid. And I know I want my block to end up 12 inches. So that means I'm going to have a 9 patch of 4-inch units. So that gave me this 4-inch square to work with. So that means that, getting these corner squares spaced out, they'd only be about an inch wide. Okay, so I can do that. And then I can color this block. And I've been playing around, so my favorite blues are highlighted there, but you can see all the different colors. If you wanted to have something that looked like fabric here, there's a library of fabric swatches, or you can just use solid colors there. So I've got my favorite blue, and that's going to be the main part of the button. And then I can come down to one of these lighter shades for those little holes that you see in the center of your button. And I'm going to make mine with 4 holes. Now, when I ask EQ8 to give me the fabric requirements for this block, it's going to look at the way I've drawn this, and there are 9 separate pieces in the center of this block. So if I come back to the draw view, you can see I know that since I colored all this center row the same color, I am going to cut 1 piece of fabric for that. So I need to erase these lines, which is easy to do with that pick tool. I can just highlight that, hit the delete key. And now when I go back to color, I've got 1 solid piece of fabric for this unit. Okay, I want to make sure that gets into the sketchbook. So we're going to add it to our sketchbook, and I already named my file button, so it's saved in my computer. Okay, now I want to put this together with the other components of my block. So I'm going to go to my quilt work table, and I'm going to lay this out as a 9-patch quilt, even though it's only a block. So I'm going to choose the horizontal quilt. My layout is only 3 by 3. So in that number of blocks section, just go down the prompts on the menu. It's 3 by 3. Now, right now, this is going to give me 9-inch blocks. I just explained I want a 12-inch finished block. So each of these squares representing the parts of my block are only going to be 4 inches. So if I enter 4 inches there, now I have a 12-inch block. It has borders on it. I don't need borders on a single block, so I'm going to delete that. And then you can always check in the bottom right, it says finished quilt size, and it shows my 12 inches. Okay, so coming back to my layout, shows me my overall settings. I'm going to come up to the top of the screen and click on design, because that's going to let me put in the components. Now, scrolling all the way over to the right, you can see I actually made 2 variations of this block, but I can just pick one and put it in the center. That's the center of my button with those little 1-inch holes representing the stitching lines. And then I want this to be a round-ish button. So I know I can make that with half square triangles. And those half square triangles are part of the default library in your EQ8 software. So we can just drop those in. I want to rotate those so that they face inward and make that kind of circular element. And then we need to get everything the same color. So across the top, I'm coming over to Fabric Tools. It shows you that fabric library, that same thing that we worked with before. So I can scroll over and find that. If you don't remember exactly which shade, just grab that eyedropper tool and hover over what you've already colored in, and it'll pick that same blue. And I know all of these components are going to be blue. And if I really wanted to, I could take that same eyedropper, hover over the background space, and put the corners as that same background. And now we have a button block ready to go. If I want to check on the cutting and piecing requirements for this quilt, I would come up here to print and export, and let's look at what it says for printing the quilt. I know this is not a quilt, it's just a block, but in the layout of the software, it thinks of this as a quilt now. Very small, but it's a quilt. I'm going to go ahead and name this button and preview. Okay, it shows me the quilt layout, but I want some rotary cutting for that center block, just to double check what I have in my head from all my years of quilting. I'm going to hit preview, and then I always need to zoom in because it shows a full page. I'm going to hover over those patches, and everything's color coded. So I need 4 squares that are 1.5 inches square. And of course, that makes those corners that you see. I need 2 rectangles that are 2.5 by 1.5. So that makes sense for this top and bottom row. And then I need 1 patch that's 2.5 by 4.5. So a lot of times I don't even bother printing this out. I just grab a sticky note and write the dimensions on, so I can go from my computer to my cutting table with a piece of paper. You could certainly take your computer with you. If you have a tablet, that makes it even easier. So that's where we would find the cutting instructions for the center of our block. I know that these solid squares are 4 inches, so I can cut those 4.5, keep your seam allowance. And same thing, I'm going to use 2 at a time. I have a standard formula. I know how big to cut my squares to get these half square triangle units. So let's go sew some buttons for Barry. I have my pieces ready for the button block, and I am going to strip piece the center. So if you wanted to cut the individual pieces, you can do that according to the pattern. But I'm going to put the 2 lighter strips on the outside of the bigger piece, and then I can subcut the units that I need, because eventually I need the background to make the buttonhole area
next to the blue that I'm using for the button. And then this piece is going to be the center, so it'll end up looking kind of like that as the center of the button. And then I've got my squares ready to do 2 at a time half square triangles. So I have marked my diagonal line and I'm ready to sew on both sides. So a little bit of construction and then we will assemble the block. One more middle step as I sew this center portion together, and then we can put together the whole block. Ta-da! There is our button block. I will give it one last press towards that center row. And I will turn it over and make sure I've got all the seams going in the correct direction. Nothing flipped over. Yeah, that center row doesn't want to press against the pieced unit, so we'll give that a little extra incentive to lay down flat and be nice and pretty. I hope Barry enjoys it. Okay, friends, it's your turn. Grab the instructions from the download link and let's flood Barry's mailbox. Are patriotic quilts more your jam? Check out this video next. I'm sewing log cabin blocks for Quilts of Valor in 2025.